So you're thinking about digitising. There are different reasons to digitise and different standards that apply based on what you would like to do with the final digital files. Here at the project we digitise to preservation standards, warts and all, which allows the files to be manipulated in the future. But that may not be necessary by your organisation. The different standards also have an impact on cost of equipment, cost of digital storage, cost of personnel. Is there a particular situation driving the digitisation? If you only need a small part of your collection for an exhibition or on your website, you may not need to digitise everything. Some formats are more stable than others and could wait longer. Your digitisation could be based on conservation needs and have a phased approach. In any argument, it is more valid when backed up with data. If you don't already have the information in your catalogue, collect as much as you can about your audio recordings. The condition of your formats will drive any digitisation for conservation argument. Any rare or unusual content will drive an argument for public access. And if you know how many items there are, the format and the conservation requirements, you can start to build a cost argument. There are two options for digitisation, in-house or contracted out. In-house will mean significant investment in resources, equipment, knowledge, skills, space to work, time, and if you're going to employ someone, salary expenses. This is a good approach if you have a large collection or if you're building a service for the future. If you contract out the work, it can be costly, especially for a large collection. You may even need to procure services from more than one commercial company if you have some rare formats. You also need to understand what you're contracting for. A large national European organisation had a large collection of compact cassettes which they wanted digitised. They didn't do their research and they contracted out. Unfortunately, they asked for Dolby Off as it was cheaper, but the cassettes had been recorded with Dolby On. The resulting files were useless to them. It had cost a lot of money and was for nothing. There are many organisations that can offer advice, and you can find out more via the Scotland Sounds network. Your organisation probably already undertakes fundraising activities. Perhaps you could do something particular for a digitisation project, or maybe you wish to consider crowdsourcing. Public buy-in to something they're passionate about can be a quick way to fund a project. Perhaps you have a local benefactor, an individual or business who could support your efforts. There are specialised funds available to make applications to, for example, Creative Scotland. There are many more and could be based on the format, the content or the geographical area. The National Lottery Heritage Fund is probably the most well-known funder that many organisations apply to. It is likely to be the place where a larger scale and more expensive project would be considered. However, bear in mind that your project will be competing against a large number of other projects. There are certain things to consider too. Some funders will have prerequisites, so for example the National Lottery Heritage Fund will want to see public access for your audio recordings. They will expect to have volunteer involvement and that you will do a certain amount of public outreach or training. This will all add extra resources and costs to your project. This will depend very much on whether you opt for in-house or contracted out and where your funding is coming from. You may wish to consider an audio engineer, a volunteer supervisor, a learning and engagement person. If a large project, there will need to be financial oversight of the budget. You may need to compile regular reports, undertake social media and website activities. For a small project, this might be 1 or 2 people. For a larger project, you may need a whole army of helpers. And presumably your organisation will be continuing with its usual activities, so you will also need to take into account resources pulled away from there. If you're involving volunteers as well as someone to supervise them, there's a lot of preparatory work, insurance, induction, training, health and safety, risk assessments, etc. Volunteer Scotland can help with many areas of advice and training. It may be that you want to appoint a project manager to have overall control of the activities. Again, this would probably only be necessary for a large project. Contracting out, it is still good to have a small group of people overseeing the process. This allows for nothing to be overlooked and would also provide that financial oversight. Once you have your digital files, that is not the end of the story. Make copies, keep them in 2 different places. Keep abreast of how information technology is changing. Although we may be using MP3 and MP4 at the moment, will we still be using them in 10 years or even 5 years' time? You may need to convert your digital files to a new format at some point. Look after your original recordings. If you're concerned about conservation issues once they've been digitised, perhaps consider donating them to a local archive or museum who can maintain them in vault conditions. Thank you, and feel free to contact Scotland Sounds for any support or advice with your project.